Hey guys, welcome to the first video I'm making on my channel here. I'm going to be going over my investment portfolio, going into some of the reasoning behind why I'm picking what I do for my portfolio, and talking a bit about how I plan to rebalance and manage my portfolio into the future. So let's get into it. One of the things when I recently graduated college, and I've been getting much more into learning about investing, and reading a lot of papers about it. And so one of my favorite people that I started watching is this guy called Ben Felix. I'm sure you've all heard of him. And he talks about this thing called factor investing. Now, I'm 23. I have a very long time horizon, probably about 40 years until I'm retiring. And that means, behavioral factors aside, I have the ability to take on higher levels of risk without having to worry about this thing called sequence of returns risk. I'm not going to get quite into that, but what I'll say is basically I can take on higher levels of risk. However, it's kind of dumb to just take on extra risk willy-nilly. Risk, there's a reason that we tend to avoid it in the market. If you're given two investment opportunities and one of them has lower volatility and one of them has a higher volatility, but they have the same expected return, it makes sense as a human that you take the lower volatility expected return because you can better plan for your future expenditures. You can better plan your lifestyle. It makes your future spending much simpler and your planning much simpler. Because of that, there's this thing called a risk premia. What that means is by taking on some types of additional risk, and we'll talk about what the basic risk is, by taking on additional types of risk, you can earn more expected return. So the basic risk here, if we look, it's the market minus rate, and this rate is just the return, the risk-free rate, market return minus risk-free rate. And this is the rate that the extra return we get for investing in equities as opposed to the risk-free rate, like TIPS, for example, in the US. But there's also these other ones, and these are called factors. And so there's a small minus big, so smaller companies have some premium. Value has some premium, value over growth. Profitability has some premium. And conservative minus aggressive investment has some premium, although this one is more contentious. Another thing that seems to have some premium, and it's not covered in here because it's not a Fallman French factor, but it's covered in other papers, is momentum, which is the idea that when a stock has been doing pretty well recently, it's going to keep performing well. So you invest in those. Now, for someone of my age and of my risk tolerance, which I think is fairly high, I should be taking on more risk. The other thing I'll say about my risk tolerance is that my concern in pulling money out of funds or whatever, which is horrible to your long-term returns, is my biggest risk of doing that is finding another investment which I think has, which is more suitable, and kind of moving into that. So my goal here was to do it right off the bat when I could still kind of remake my portfolio without eating taxes, because for the moment, I'm not making any money, like income-wise, and so I can afford to do that because I won't ever get taxed on this. So my portfolio is very heavily invested in small cap value. I do have 20% in DFUS, which is kind of a broad market, but it does have value factor tilts as well. The A's here are all Avantis funds. The D is a dimensional fund. This one isn't. The Q's are Alpha Architect. Now, everyone my age, even if you have the same risk profile, you're going to have a different portfolio. There's no true optimal portfolio because we don't really know how they're going to change into the future. These are all actively managed funds. And so you can run correlations with different factors and kind of backtest that, but that doesn't actually tell you what's truly going to happen into the future. So the goal here is to kind of get it as right as you can. So you can see I wrote down here, I basically have this is out of the total, it's like 58% US equities, 35 international equities, 7% managed futures. Out of the equities, 62% is US, 38 in international. That's basically what the world market cap weighting is. And so I didn't see any reason, I am a US investor, I didn't see any reason to home country bias. It just seemed unhelpful. And so I'm not going to target it too much because the way I have the funds distributed, the way I would have to balance this is basically say these each make up like, what is this? 33, right? So out of 58, this makes up like, a little bit less than half of the total U.S. market. And so if the whole U.S. market started making up 10% less, well, I would adjust this down accordingly by, not 5% of this. Whatever. It's not a big enough deal. I'll talk about rebalancing later, but in terms of finding funds, generally, I think this is a pretty good place to go for factor. You can do the regressions on your own if you want, but this site makes it really easy. So you can see the Avantis funds here tend to be, I have it so it has to be statistically significant. The Avantis funds tend to have, especially AVUV here, it's a pretty big holding of mine. It's never going to be the top for all of these. So obviously you have large growth or whatever. And for this date interval as well, you're not necessarily going to beat all of these. Although this is weird because small minus big, I don't know why large growth is super involved. But you can see there's some other ones that are very pure value. Oh, right. Sorry, I was doing it for the market. And you'll see AVUV is there, so it's pretty good. It has beta exposure. Small minus big, it's down here. You know, it has that size exposure. High minus low, and this has to do with like how value it is. Now you can see it's not on here. Q-val is. Okay, so that's pretty heavy value. But, you know, it's here, and in terms of the actual amount of correlation, it's not that much less. I don't know if this is, yeah, it's regression. So, what this is good at, and there's research that backs this up, is that you want to combine all these different factor screenings together to pick your stocks. And I think AVUV does this incredibly well. I don't care as much about this conservative minus aggressive. See, AVUV is here as well, and Q-val is the biggest. And this is like a profitability screen. So that's kind of how I come to my results. The other thing you can do is look at ETF Research Center, and they will have kind of comparisons. So there's nothing quite like this fund, but if I was going to pick a comparison, I would do something like the DFSV, the dimensional version. So there's some overlap. You can actually see here, it will show you kind of the idea. So what's cool to see, I like seeing that these, you know, famous factor fund managers do have overlap. The way I mean overlap, this has fewer holdings because it's more concentrated value, small cap value. But this 72% is pretty good. So that means like this just is a bit wider. And you can see what they all are. I don't think it has correlation here. No, but you can look it up if you want. You can see the performance and flows. You'll see the cost is 25 pips. It's not amazing, but it's pure average, right? So the pure average 63.7. The spread is awesome on this fund. It's 2 pips. So for being actively managed, I think it's really good, and the factors should overcome that pretty easily. And that's one of the reasons I picked this over DFSV. You can do, like, look at this. I don't really know how great of an idea this is, but the factor scorecard will, like, give you some idea. See momentum. But if I do QMOM, I see it's I guess it's not scoring very well in there, but that's okay. But you can see, so comps in terms of this, comps are super it's super non-comparable. I think this fund is it's passively managed too. I mean, this one's pretty cool because it only has 93 holdings, but yeah, this one is a lot more. It doesn't have other screens as well. It's a passive fund. This one is really cheap, and I looked at this. I really considered this. But ultimately, I didn't go with it because it's such a small part of my portfolio that I didn't want to go with it. That I wanted it to be slightly more, concentrated in the factors. Okay. Now I want to talk about my kind of alternatives. So I already talked about QMOM, And momentum acts as a diversifier. And so the way you diversify, obviously, is, first of all, don't buy individual stocks. Second of all, don't buy individual sectors. Third of all, don't buy individual countries. But another thing is, don't buy individual risk premia. And so, while this isn't like, managed futures isn't actually like a risk premium, but what it is a kind of trend following strategy. And it's very quant. DBMF basically uses regression to find a portfolio that explains what kind of the hedge funds that are doing managed futures are doing. Because of that, it's only 85 pips compared to some of the funds for managed futures. Just looking at, they easily are getting over, 125 pips. What I'm trying to do is just diversify this. I'm not probably maximizing expected returns by having this in here. What I am trying to do is increase my median return path. So what I mean is, like, if you get a Monte Carlo sim of all the different outcomes for my portfolio, under different regimes, under everything, the average return at the very end may not be any better by adding this, and it may be a little bit worse. But what will likely be better is if you just look at the line that's in the middle of all the other lines for the return path. That line is going to have a better return. And that does matter to me. I only get to live one life. I only get to realize one returns path. And so improving that, I think, brings real value to me. Now, talking about kind of how I'm going about investing. So I have a calculator here. I can actually pull it over for a sec. I have this calculator where, let's say I'm putting in $1,000. This is what I have here as an example. It will just calculate, and my desired breakdowns, will just calculate how many shares to buy. Tell me I have this much cash left over. Do that. Throw this in. I throw it in this money market because I use Schwab, but you can do whatever. And then what I do for rebalancing is I do threshold, where it's a 20%. Once I have 20% kind of difference off of what off of my target allocation, I will adjust. And it works out so that, like, there's a 5% rule for some of the bigger allocations. Works out. So basically, I think for like AVUV, either way, it's like 5%, so it doesn't really matter. My final point is in my strategy for taxable versus non-taxable accounts. So right now, I don't have a ton of money. And it's split pretty evenly between taxable and non-taxable. I have a Roth with about half of my money, and my other half's in taxable accounts. So because of that, because I'm not going to be like getting hit super hard in taxes on my taxable accounts, I have everything just split evenly for each account. I try to hit the same percentages for each account. Now, it may not be like perfect, but what my goal is I'm going to be earning most of the money for my portfolio in the future, right? What I have now is, hopefully, just the start. So because of that, my goal is to basically do rebalancing as I go. And it's way easier to rebalance in my non-taxable when I already have everything I need in my non-taxable, right? If I don't have any shares of something in my non-taxable, I can't sell it. So my goal is just I just want to set it up this way. It may not be perfect. I didn't stress this part too much. And it's something I'll probably stress more as I am making more money. But that is my kind of philosophy about investing. That's my portfolio explained. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. If you want to talk to me on Blossom, interact with me, read my stuff, argue with me, I'll have a Blossom referral code in the description. I think I get a little bit of money if I do that. I don't know if you get any, but it would be helpful. And thanks for watching.